The gray wolf at the front of the pack stood so close that Sarah could see the individual hairs around its muzzle, silver-tipped and bristling, her back pressed against the barn wall, nowhere left to go. 7 wolves formed a semicircle around her, their breath visible in the frigid January air, eyes fixed on hers without blinking. She could smell them, wet fur and something wild that made her stomach twist. The leader's ears twitched forward. Sarah's hands shook so violently she dropped the milk pail, and the sound of metal hitting frozen ground echoed across the empty ranch yard. That's when the wolf did something that made her breath catch in her throat. It sat down. Then, one by one, the others did the same, until all 7 wolves were sitting in the snow, watching her with an intensity that felt almost human. Sarah had lived on this ranch for 17 years and had never seen anything like it. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change everything she thought she knew about the wild. What I'm about to tell you today will stay with you long after you hear it. But first, tell me, where are you listening from? I love knowing which corner of this big country you're joining me from. Drop it in the comments below. Sarah's morning had started the way every morning started on the Fletcher Ranch. Before dawn, with the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of her father's boots on the wooden floor downstairs. She'd dressed in the dark, pulled her hair back with the leather cord her mother had braided years ago, and descended the stairs while the house was still quiet. Her father was already gone. She could tell by the single cup in the sink and the door left slightly ajar, letting in the January cold. He'd been leaving earlier and earlier these past 3 months, ever since the first cattle went missing. The ranch sat at the edge of Pine Valley, where the grasslands met the forest and civilization gave way to something older and less forgiving. Her father, William Fletcher, had built everything here with his own hands over 25 years. The barn, the fences, the small house with its stone chimney. Sarah had been born in the bedroom upstairs, delivered by a midwife who'd ridden 12 miles through a snowstorm. Her mother had died when Sarah was 9, caught by fever that no doctor could reach in time. Since then, it had been just the 2 of them, working the land, tending the cattle, surviving. This morning, Sarah had milking to do. Their dairy cow, Bessie, was getting old but still produced enough for their needs and a little extra to trade in town. Sarah grabbed the pail from its hook and stepped into the cold, her breath immediately visible. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised snow by afternoon. The barn stood 50 yards from the house, red paint faded to rust in places, but solid. Her father had built it to last. Everything he did was built to last. She pushed open the barn door and immediately knew something was wrong. Bessie wasn't in her stall. The gate hung open, swinging slightly on its hinges. Sarah's heart picked up speed. She set down the pail and walked through the barn, checking each stall, calling softly. Nothing. The back door of the barn was open too. Just a crack, but enough. Enough for a cow to wander out, or for something to wander in. Sarah stood in the doorway and scanned the snow-covered pasture behind the barn. No tracks except the ones she recognized. Deer, rabbit, the meandering path of a fox. Then she saw them. Deeper impressions in the snow, heading toward the tree line. Cow tracks. And beside them, pressed clear and unmistakable in the powder, the prints of wolves. Not one wolf. Many. Her stomach tightened. The pack had been moving closer to the ranch for months now, growing bolder. 3 neighboring ranches had lost livestock. One family had packed up and left entirely. She should have gone back to the house. Should have waited for her father. But Bessie was out there, and the longer Sarah waited, the worse it would get. She grabbed the rifle from inside the barn door. Her father's old Winchester, kept loaded and ready. The weight of it felt familiar in her hands. He'd taught her to shoot when she was 12, made her practice until she could hit a tin can at 100 yards. "You're alone out here more than you should be," he'd said. "You need to know how to protect yourself." Sarah followed the tracks across the pasture, the snow crunching under her boots. The cold bit at her cheeks and made her eyes water. The tracks led straight toward the forest, where the pines grew thick and the shadows stayed dark even at midday. She could hear her own breathing, loud in the silence. The forest had a way of swallowing sound, of making you feel small and exposed. She'd played in these woods as a child, but that was before she understood what lived here. The tracks disappeared into the trees. Sarah hesitated at the edge, scanning the darkness between the trunks. Nothing moved. No sound except the whisper of wind through the branches. She took a breath and stepped into the forest, rifle ready. The temperature dropped immediately, the wind blocked by the dense growth. Snow had collected in drifts beneath the trees, and the tracks became harder to follow. She moved slowly, stopping every few steps to listen. That's when she heard it. A low sound, barely audible, the heavy breathing of something large. She froze, finger on the trigger. The sound came again, closer this time, off to her left. Sarah turned slowly, raising the rifle. Through the trees, maybe 30 yards away, she saw movement. A flash of gray fur, then another. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The wolves weren't just nearby. They were circling her. She backed up slowly, keeping the rifle raised, trying to watch all directions at once. A branch snapped behind her. She spun around. Nothing there. When she turned back, a wolf stood directly in her path, watching her. It was massive, gray and white, with pale eyes that seemed to measure her. Sarah's hands tightened on the rifle. The wolf didn't move, didn't growl or bare its teeth. It just stood there, blocking her way back toward the ranch. More movement to her right. Another wolf emerged from behind a fallen log, then another on her left. Sarah's breath came faster. She counted 4, 5, 6 of them, materializing from the shadows like ghosts. They moved with coordinated precision, cutting off every escape route. She was being herded, pushed deeper into the forest, away from home, away from help. Her mind raced. She couldn't shoot them all. Even if she got one, the others would be on her before she could reload. She kept backing up, trying to keep them all in her line of sight, but they kept appearing, more and more of them. 7 wolves now. 8. The largest one, the gray and white she'd seen first, moved closer, ears forward, eyes locked on hers. Sarah's back hit something solid. She glanced back. The barn. Somehow they'd driven her in a circle. She was back at the ranch, but on the far side of the barn, away from the house, away from any chance of her father hearing if she called. The wolves tightened their circle. Sarah pressed her back against the barn wall, rifle raised, but her hands shaking so badly she wasn't sure she could aim. The gray wolf at the front stood so close now that she could see the individual hairs around its muzzle, silver-tipped and bristling. She could smell them, wet fur and something wild that made her stomach twist. The leader's ears twitched forward. 7 wolves formed a semicircle around her, their breath visible in the frigid air, eyes fixed on hers without blinking. Her finger hovered over the trigger. 1 shot. That's all she'd get. After that, whatever happened would happen. The wolf closest to her tilted its head slightly, studying her. Sarah's hands shook so violently, she dropped the milk pail she'd forgotten she was still carrying in her left hand. The metal hit the frozen ground with a clang that echoed across the empty ranch yard. Every wolf's ear twitched at the sound, but none of them moved. Then the gray wolf did something that made Sarah's breath catch. It sat down, just lowered itself onto its haunches in the snow, tail curling around its feet, and continued to watch her. For a moment, nothing else happened. Sarah stood frozen, not understanding. Then, one by one, the other wolves sat too. All 7 of them, forming a perfect semicircle around her, sitting in the snow like dogs waiting for a command. Not growling, not advancing, just sitting, watching. Sarah's mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Wolves didn't behave like this. They were predators. They hunted in packs, took down elk and deer and cattle. They didn't sit patiently in the snow watching a 17-year-old girl with a rifle. Her father had told her stories about wolves all her life, about their cunning, their ruthlessness, their hunger. He'd shown her the scars on his arm from a wolf that had come after their chickens when Sarah was just a baby. Wolves were dangerous. They were to be feared. And yet, the gray wolf's eyes never left hers. There was something in that gaze that Sarah couldn't name. Not hunger, not threat. Something else entirely. Intelligence, maybe. Understanding. The wolf's ears were forward but relaxed. Its mouth was closed. Every part of its body language spoke of calm attention, not aggression. Sarah slowly lowered the rifle just a few inches, watching for any sign of attack. Nothing. The wolves remained seated, utterly still, except for the occasional twitch of an ear or flick of a tail. Minutes passed. Sarah didn't know how many. Her arms ached from holding the rifle. Her back hurt from pressing against the barn wall. The cold seeped through her coat, but she didn't dare move. The wolves didn't move either. They sat in the snow, breath rising in clouds, waiting. For what, Sarah had no idea. The sun climbed higher, though it remained hidden behind the gray clouds. The morning was slipping away. Her father would be coming back soon, expecting breakfast, expecting Sarah to be in the house, safe. The gray wolf made a soft sound in its throat. Not a growl, something gentler, almost like a question. Then it stood up, slowly, deliberately. Sarah's hands tightened on the rifle again, but the wolf didn't approach. Instead, it turned and walked away, heading back toward the forest. The other wolves stood and followed, one by one, disappearing into the trees as silently as they'd appeared. Within seconds, Sarah was alone in the snow, her back still pressed against the barn wall, heart pounding, trying to understand what had just happened. She stood there for a long time after they'd gone, scanning the tree line, waiting for them to reappear. They didn't. Finally, her legs began to shake, not from fear this time, but from the adrenaline draining out of her system. She slid down the barn wall and sat in the snow, rifle across her lap, and tried to catch her breath. Her hands were still trembling. Her whole body was trembling. She'd been surrounded by a pack of wolves and lived to tell about it. More than that, they'd let her go. They'd sat in the snow and then walked away. A sound behind her made her jump. She spun around, raising the rifle again. But it was just Bessie, emerging from the barn's side door, walking calmly across the snow toward Sarah. The cow looked completely unbothered, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Sarah stared at her. The tracks she'd followed, Bessie's tracks leading into the forest, had they really been leading away? Or had Sarah been so focused on following them that she hadn't noticed they were actually leading back? Sarah got to her feet slowly, legs unsteady. She walked around to the front of the barn and looked at the ground. There, in the snow, she could see it clearly now. The wolf tracks hadn't been chasing Bessie. They'd been guiding her, pushing her gently back toward the barn, back toward safety. And when Sarah had followed, thinking she was rescuing her cow, the wolves had been ready. They'd been waiting, but not to attack. To what? To see her? To study her? To make contact? She heard her father's horse before she saw him, the steady clop of hooves on frozen ground coming up the main path from the south pasture. William Fletcher rode into the yard and dismounted, tying his horse to the post near the house. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a gray beard that made him look older than his 50 years. His eyes found Sarah immediately, taking in the rifle in her hands, the way she was standing near the barn. His expression hardened. What happened? His voice was rough from years of shouting across wide spaces. Sarah opened her mouth to answer and realized she didn't know what to say. How could she explain what she'd just experienced? How could she make him understand that the wolves hadn't attacked her, hadn't threatened her, had just sat in the snow and watched her like they were waiting for something? He'd think she was crazy. Or worse, he'd think she'd frozen up, failed to defend the ranch when she had the chance. Nothing, she said finally. Bessie got out. I brought her back. It wasn't exactly a lie. Both those things were true. She just left out the middle part. The important part. Her father's eyes narrowed, studying her face, reading the tension in her shoulders. He'd always been able to tell when she was holding something back, but this time he didn't press. He just nodded slowly and looked toward the tree line. Wolves? He asked. Sarah nodded. How many? She hesitated. 7, maybe 8. Her father's jaw tightened. He spat in the snow. They're getting bold, too bold. We need to do something about this before they take more than a cow. He turned to look at her. You fire any shots? Sarah shook her head. Didn't get a clear shot. Another lie. But what else could she say? Her father studied her for another long moment, then nodded again. Come on, he said. Let's get inside. You look frozen. He started walking toward the house. Sarah didn't move. She stood by the barn, staring at the tree line where the wolves had disappeared. Her father stopped and turned back. Sarah? She looked at him. This man who'd taught her everything he knew about surviving in this harsh place. This man who'd lost his wife and raised his daughter alone. Who'd built a life from nothing but determination and hard work. This man who saw wolves as nothing but a threat to be eliminated. Pa, she said quietly. What if the wolves aren't what we think they are? Her father's expression didn't change. What are they then? Sarah looked back at the forest. She could still see them in her mind, sitting in the snow, watching her with those pale, intelligent eyes. "I don't know," she said, "but I don't think they want to hurt us." William Fletcher walked back to his daughter. He put a hand on her shoulder, heavy and warm. "The wolves are predators, Sarah. That's their nature. They might not have attacked you today, but that doesn't mean they won't tomorrow. This land is hard enough without romanticizing the things that want to take what's ours." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Don't mistake hesitation for mercy. And don't mistake today's luck for a promise." Sarah nodded but said nothing. Her father headed back to the house, and after a moment she followed. But before she went inside, she turned one last time to look at the forest. The gray wolf stood at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the shadows, watching. Their eyes met across the snow-covered yard. Then the wolf turned and disappeared into the darkness beneath the pines. Sarah stood on the porch, hand on the door, and felt something shift inside her, something that would make the next choice impossible to avoid. Inside the house, Sarah moved through the motions of making breakfast while her mind replayed the morning over and over. The way the wolves had sat, the intelligence in their eyes, the deliberate way they'd guided Bessie back to safety. Her father sat at the table cleaning his rifle, running the cloth along the barrel with practiced movements. The smell of gun oil filled the kitchen. He hadn't spoken since they'd come inside, but Sarah could feel the weight of what he was thinking. "Anderson's riding over this afternoon," he said finally, not looking up from his work. "Him and the Briggs boys. We're going into the forest." Sarah's hand froze on the coffee pot. "What for?" Her father looked at her then, his eyes hard. "What do you think? Those wolves are getting too comfortable. It's time we reminded them this is our land, not theirs." He set down the rifle and picked up his pistol. "We'll track them to their den. End this before we lose any more stock." Sarah poured the coffee, her mind racing. She set the cup in front of her father, careful to keep her hands steady. "Maybe they'll move on," she said. "Now that winter's here, maybe they'll head deeper into the mountains." Her father shook his head. "Wolves don't just move on. They find easy prey and they stay until there's nothing left to take. We've been patient long enough." He took a sip of coffee. "You did good this morning keeping your head, but next time you take the shot." The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Sarah went through her chores mechanically, feeding the chickens, checking the fences, bringing in firewood, but her thoughts kept returning to the wolves, to the gray one with the pale eyes. She'd hunted before. She'd shot deer, rabbits, even a bear that had gotten into their smokehouse, but those had been for food, for survival. This felt different. This felt like something would be lost that couldn't be replaced. By early afternoon, Sarah heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 3 riders coming up the path. Frank Anderson rode in front, a thick man with a red face and hands like hams. Behind him came the Briggs boys, Tommy and Jack, barely 20 years old but already hard from ranch work. All 3 had rifles slung across their saddles. Her father went out to meet them, and Sarah watched from the window as they talked, pointing toward the forest, making plans. She should have stayed inside, should have let the men handle it the way they always handled things. But her feet carried her to the door, and before she could stop herself, she was outside, walking across the yard toward them. The men turned to look at her. Anderson tipped his hat. "Miss Fletcher," he said, "your pa tells us you had a run-in with the pack this morning." Sarah nodded. "They didn't hurt me." Anderson's eyes narrowed. "Not yet, they didn't. We found their tracks heading north," Tommy Briggs said, eager as a hunting dog. "Den's probably up near Widow's Peak. We get there before dark, we can smoke them out." He patted his rifle. "Won't take long." Sarah looked at her father. "Pa, can I talk to you? Just for a minute?" William Fletcher excused himself and walked with Sarah back toward the house. When they were out of earshot, he stopped and crossed his arms. "What is it?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "This morning when I was out there with the wolves, they could have attacked me. I was cornered. I had 1 rifle against 7 of them. But they didn't. They just sat down and watched me, and then they left." Her father's jaw tightened. "You told me you didn't get a clear shot. You didn't mention being cornered." Sarah met his eyes. "I know. But Pa, listen. They had me. They could have killed me. But they chose not to. Doesn't that mean something?" "It means you got lucky," her father said flatly. "It means they weren't hungry enough or brave enough to take you on. Don't read more into it than that. He put his hand on her shoulder again, but this time it felt like a warning. Nature isn't gentle, Sarah. It isn't kind. Those wolves are wild animals, and wild animals do what serves them. Today it served them to leave you alone. Tomorrow it might serve them to tear apart our cattle. Or worse. Sarah wanted to argue, to make him understand what she'd felt in that moment with the wolves. But she could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind. The men were waiting. The hunt was decided. She stepped back. "Be careful," she said quietly. Her father nodded. "We will. Stay close to the house until we get back. Keep the rifle loaded." Then he walked back to the other men, mounted his horse, and the four of them rode toward the forest. Sarah watched them disappear into the trees. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, turning the snow orange and pink. She stood in the yard for a long time, listening to the silence. Then she turned and went into the barn. She saddled her horse, a young mare named Stella, and grabbed the rifle. Her hands moved with certainty even as her mind screamed that this was foolish, that she should stay home like her father said. But she couldn't, not knowing what she knew, not after what she'd seen. She rode out the back way, taking the narrow trail that wound through the eastern side of the property. The trail her mother used to take when she wanted to be alone, to think. Sarah knew these woods better than any of the men. She'd explored every path, climbed every ridge. If the wolves' den was near Widow's Peak, she knew a faster way to get there. The men would follow the main tracks, moving slow and careful. Sarah could cut through the ravine and be there first. The temperature dropped as the sun sank lower. Sarah's breath and Stella's breath rose in clouds. The mare was nervous, ears swiveling at every sound, but she trusted Sarah and kept moving. They climbed higher, following the narrow path through dense pines. Sarah could hear water running somewhere below, the creek that fed their well, rushing with snowmelt. Above her, a hawk circled, its cry sharp in the cold air. She thought about her mother as she rode. Clara Fletcher had loved these woods. She'd taught Sarah the names of every plant, shown her which berries were safe to eat, and which would make you sick. She told Sarah stories about the animals, not the harsh, practical stories her father told, but gentler ones. Stories about balance, about respect, about the old ways. Her mother had been part Shoshone, though she'd rarely spoken of her childhood. But sometimes late at night she'd tell Sarah things, important things. "The wolf is not our enemy," she'd said once, braiding Sarah's hair before bed. "The wolf is a teacher. He shows us how to be strong in a pack, how to survive the hardest winters. Some people forget that. They see only teeth and fur and fear what they don't understand." Sarah had been 7, maybe 8. She hadn't understood then. But now, riding through the forest with the memory of those pale eyes in her mind, she thought maybe she was beginning to. The ravine opened up ahead. Sarah guided Stella down carefully, letting the mare pick her way between the rocks. At the bottom, the creek ran fast and clear. Sarah let Stella drink while she scanned the opposite ridge. There, movement in the trees, a flash of gray. Her heart jumped. She dismounted and tied Stella to a low branch, then crept forward on foot, rifle ready but not raised. She didn't want to threaten, she wanted to see. She climbed the ridge quietly, using the skills her father had taught her for stalking deer. Step, pause, listen. Step, pause, listen. The snow was deeper here, untouched except for animal tracks. She saw the prints clearly. Wolves moving in single file, heading north. Fresh tracks. She followed them, her breath shallow, every sense alert. The trees thinned and Sarah found herself at the edge of a clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, sat the gray wolf, alone, waiting, as if it had known she would come. Sarah's breath caught. The wolf's head turned toward her, those pale eyes finding hers across the distance. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the wolf stood and walked toward her. Not aggressive, not threatening, just walking, as calm as if they were old friends meeting on a familiar path. Sarah's hands tightened on the rifle, but she didn't raise it. The wolf stopped 10 feet away. Up close, Sarah could see the scars on its muzzle, the gray in its fur. This was an old wolf, a leader. It sat down in the snow and made that soft sound again, the one Sarah had heard that morning. Not quite a whine, not quite a hum, something between. A sound that bypassed her mind and went straight to some older part of her. some peace that remembered when humans and wolves shared the same fires. Behind the gray wolf, others emerged from the trees, the same pack from this morning. 7 wolves moving into the clearing like shadows. They arranged themselves in a semicircle, the same formation as before, watching, waiting. Sarah's logical mind told her to run, told her she was in danger, but something deeper, something her mother's voice whispered in her memory, told her to stay, to listen, to see what they wanted her to see. The gray wolf stood and walked to the far side of the clearing. It stopped and looked back at Sarah, then continued into the trees. Sarah understood. It was leading her somewhere, showing her something. She glanced back toward where she'd left Stella. She should go back, should ride home. This was crazy. But her feet were already moving, following the wolf deeper into the forest. They walked for maybe 10 minutes. The other wolves flanked Sarah on both sides, not close enough to touch but near enough that she could hear their breathing, their paws crunching in the snow. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Sarah felt strangely calm, like she was exactly where she needed to be. The gray wolf stopped at the base of a rocky outcrop, looked at Sarah one more time, then disappeared into a dark opening between the rocks. Sarah approached slowly, the entrance to a den. She could smell them now, the musky, earthy scent of wolves. Her hand tightened on the rifle, but she didn't pull it up. She stepped closer, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. Inside the den, she heard movement. Then she heard something else, a sound that made her heart clench, whimpering, high-pitched, weak. She knelt at the entrance, peering in. The gray wolf sat at the back of the den, and beside it, barely visible in the shadows, were 3 pups. Small, maybe 6 weeks old. But something was wrong. Sarah could see it immediately. One of the pups lay very still. Another was trying to move but kept falling over. The third looked healthy but was crying. That desperate, hungry cry of an animal that hasn't eaten. Sarah's mind put the pieces together. The wolves had been coming near the ranch not to hunt. They'd been desperate. The winter had been harsh. The pack's food sources had dried up. And the mother, Sarah looked around the den and didn't see another adult wolf. Just the gray one. Just the leader. Where was the mother? Then Sarah saw, partially hidden by rocks, the body of a female wolf. Still, cold, dead. The gray wolf watched Sarah, and in its eyes, she saw something that broke her heart. Not aggression, not hunger, desperation. The wolf was trying to keep these pups alive alone. It couldn't hunt and stay with them. Couldn't leave them to freeze while it searched for food. The pack had been trying to survive, just like Sarah and her father, just like every living thing in this brutal winter. Sarah heard voices in the distance, male voices. Her father and the others getting closer. They were tracking the wolves, following the same signs Sarah had followed. In minutes, they'd be here. They'd find the den. They'd kill the wolves, all of them, including the pups. That's what you did with predators. You eliminated the threat completely so it couldn't come back. Sarah made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. She stood and backed out of the den. The gray wolf followed her, standing at the entrance. Sarah looked at it. "I can't save you," she whispered, "but I can give you time." She turned and ran back the way she'd come, her boots slipping on the snow. She reached the clearing and kept running, heading toward the voices. She crashed through the brush, making noise, letting them hear her. Her father appeared first, rifle raised. When he saw it was Sarah, his face went from alarm to anger. "What the hell are you doing out here? I told you to stay at the house." The other men emerged behind him, all of them staring at her. Sarah bent over, hands on her knees, gasping. "I heard shots," she lied. "I thought you were in trouble. I rode out, but Stella threw a shoe and I had to leave her. I got turned around." Her father lowered his rifle. "You didn't hear shots. We haven't seen anything yet." He looked at her closely. "Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head. "Just scared. And cold. Can we go back, please?" Anderson laughed. "Girls got no business out here. Told you, Fletcher. Women don't have the stomach for this kind of work." Sarah bit back her response and looked at her father with wide eyes, playing the part, the frightened girl who needed protection. William Fletcher sighed and looked at the other men. "Sun's going down anyway. We'll lose the light soon. Better to start fresh tomorrow, come out at dawn when we can see what we're doing." Tommy Briggs protested. "We're close, Mr. Fletcher. I can feel it." But Sarah's father was already helping her up. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "We do this right or we don't do it at all." The men grumbled but agreed. They helped Sarah find Stella, who was fine, shoe intact. Sarah's lie transparent to anyone who looked closely, but no one did. They rode back together as the sun set, painting the snow blood red. Sarah kept her face neutral, kept her breathing steady, but inside, her heart was pounding. She'd bought the wolves one night to move the pups, to find a safer place, one night to disappear deeper into the mountains where the men wouldn't follow. Back at the ranch, her father sent the other men home with promises to start again at first light. Sarah unsaddled Stella and brushed her down, taking longer than necessary. When she finally went inside, her father was sitting at the table, the rifle disassembled in front of him. He didn't look up when she entered. "That was foolish," he said quietly, "going out there alone." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm sorry." Her father looked at her then, really looked at her. "You're lying to me." It wasn't a question. Sarah's throat tightened. "Pop," he held up a hand. "I don't know what you saw out there, and I don't know why you're protecting them. But those wolves are dangerous, Sarah. And tomorrow we're going to do what needs to be done." He started reassembling the rifle. "Get some sleep and stay in the house." Sarah went upstairs to her room. She didn't sleep. She sat at the window watching the forest, watching for movement in the trees. Hours passed. The moon rose full and bright, turning the snow silver. And then she saw them. Dark shapes moving along the tree line, heading north. The pack, moving fast, carrying something in their mouths. The pups, Sarah realized. The gray wolf brought up the rear, stopping once to look back at the house. Sarah pressed her hand against the cold glass. The wolf stood in the moonlight for a long moment, and even across the distance, Sarah felt the weight of its gaze. Then it turned and followed the others into the darkness. Sarah watched until they disappeared. She didn't know if they'd survive the winter, didn't know if she'd ever see them again. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow morning, when her father and the others went hunting, they would find an empty den, and they would find tracks leading north, deep into the mountains where no man would follow. The wolves would have a chance. Maybe not a good chance, but a chance. And sometimes, Sarah thought, pressing her forehead against the glass, sometimes a chance was all anyone needed. What would you have done? Would you have stayed silent and let nature take its course? Or would you have done what Sarah did, knowing it might cost you everything? Think about it, because what happens next and changes everything. Dawn came too quickly. Sarah heard her father moving downstairs before the sun had fully risen, heard the scrape of his chair, the clink of his coffee cup. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the image of the wolves disappearing into the forest, carrying their pups to safety. She dressed slowly, pulling on her warmest clothes, and went downstairs. Her father stood by the window, already wearing his coat and hat. He turned when she entered. "They're here," he said. Through the window, Sarah could see Anderson and the Briggs boys riding up, their breath and their horse's breath rising in the cold morning air. Her father picked up his rifle and checked it one more time. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. "Pa," she started, but he held up his hand. "Not now, Sarah. I need to focus." He walked to the door, then paused. "Stay inside today. No wandering." Then he was gone. Sarah watched from the window as the four men rode toward the forest. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She knew what they would find. An empty den, tracks leading north. Her father would know. He would put the pieces together. Her strange behavior yesterday, her appearance in the forest at just the right time to delay them. He would know she'd warned the wolves somehow, given them time to escape. The morning stretched out endlessly. Sarah tried to do her chores, but her mind was elsewhere. She spilled the chicken feed, dropped a bucket of water, finally gave up and sat by the window, watching the tree line, waiting. The sun climbed higher, pale and cold behind gray clouds. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Good, Sarah thought. The snow would cover the wolves' tracks, make them harder to follow. It was past noon when the men returned. Sarah saw them from a distance and her stomach dropped. Something was wrong. They rode slowly, their shoulders hunched. When they got closer, she saw why. Across Anderson's saddle lay the body of a wolf, not the gray one, A younger wolf, darker, smaller. One of the pack. Sarah felt her throat close up. She met her father at the door. He dismounted without looking at her, his face harder than stone. Anderson and the Briggs boys stayed mounted, waiting. Her father pulled the wolf's body from Anderson's horse and dropped it in the snow at Sarah's feet. "We found the den," he said, his voice flat. "Empty. Tracks heading north, just like you knew they would be." Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't move. The dead wolf's eyes were open, staring at nothing. This one was too slow. Her father continued. "Stayed behind to cover the others' escape. Tried to lead us away from the pups." He finally looked at Sarah, and the disappointment in his eyes was worse than any anger. "You warned them. Don't know how, don't know when, but you gave them time to run." Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "Pa, there were pups. 3 pups. Their mother was dead, they would have died. So you chose them over your own family." Her father's words cut like a knife. "You chose wolves over your father." Sarah shook her head, tears starting to blur her vision. "No. I chose mercy. I chose—" But her father had already turned away. He looked at the other men. "Go on home. Hunt's over." Anderson opened his mouth to say something, but thought better of it. The 3 men rode off without a word. Sarah and her father stood in the yard, the snow falling around them, the dead wolf between them. "Get rid of it," her father said. "Bury it or burn it, I don't care. But get it off my property." He walked toward the house, then stopped. "Your mother would have done the same thing," he said quietly, not turning around. "That's what scares me. She saw good in things that had none, and it made her soft, made her weak." He went inside and closed the door. Sarah knelt in the snow beside the wolf. Up close, she could see it was young, maybe 2 years old. A female. She ran her hand along its fur, still soft, still warm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She dragged the body to the edge of the property, to a spot beneath a pine tree where her mother used to sit and watch the sunset. She dug through the frozen ground with a shovel, her hands blistering, her back screaming. It took hours. When the grave was finally deep enough, Sarah lowered the wolf into it gently. She stood there for a long time, looking down at the dark shape in the earth. Then she began to cover it, shoveling the dirt back in, packing it down. When it was done, she stood and said a prayer her mother had taught her. Words in a language Sarah didn't fully understand but felt in her bones. Words about respect and balance and the circle of life and death. The sun was setting when she walked back to the house. Her father sat at the table, a glass of whiskey in front of him. He didn't look up when she entered. Sarah washed her hands at the basin, scrubbing the dirt from under her nails. "I'm not sorry," she said finally. Her father took a drink. "I know," he replied. The silence between them was thick and heavy. Sarah made dinner. Neither of them ate much. That night, Sarah lay in bed and listened to the wind howling outside. The temperature had dropped. The storm was getting worse. She thought about the wolves, somewhere in the mountains, huddled together for warmth. She thought about the pups, small and vulnerable, struggling to survive. She thought about the young wolf in the grave, who had given her life so the others could escape. Sarah pulled her blanket tighter and cried into her pillow. The next morning, her father was gone before she woke. No coffee made, no note, just the cold house and the empty chair. Sarah went about her chores mechanically, fed the chickens, milked Bessie, brought in firewood. The day passed in gray silence. Her father came back after dark, said nothing, ate nothing, went to bed. This pattern continued for 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of her father barely looking at her. On the 4th day, Sarah woke to the sound of someone knocking at the door. She went downstairs and found Sheriff Morrison standing on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Miss Fletcher," he said, "is your father home?" Sarah called up the stairs and her father came down, his face questioning. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "There's been some trouble in town," he said. "The Jenkins family. Their youngest boy went missing yesterday afternoon." Sarah's blood went cold. Her father's expression didn't change. "What does that have to do with us?" The sheriff shifted his weight. "The boy's mother says he was playing near the forest edge, near your property line. And Anderson's been talking about the wolves, about how they're still out there, about how they might be getting desperate." The sheriff looked at Sarah. "About how someone let them go." "My daughter had nothing to do with a missing child," her father said. his voice hard. The sheriff held up his hands. I'm not saying she did, but people are scared, Fletcher. They want those wolves dealt with, and they're saying if you won't do it, they will. He put his hat back on. I'm organizing a search party for the boy. Dawn tomorrow. Could use your help. Her father nodded. We'll be there. The sheriff left. Sarah grabbed her coat. I'm coming too. Her father blocked her path. No, you're not. Sarah met his eyes. If that boy is lost in the forest, I know those woods better than anyone. You know I do. Mama taught me every trail, every hollow. You need me. Her father's jaw worked. Finally, he nodded. But you stay close. You don't go off on your own. Understand? Sarah nodded. They rode into town in silence. By the time they arrived, 20 men had gathered in the town square, all armed, all grim-faced. Mrs. Jenkins stood off to the side, her face red and swollen from crying. Her husband had his arm around her, but she looked like she might collapse at any moment. The boy was 7 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a brown coat when he disappeared. Last seen chasing a rabbit toward the tree line. The sheriff divided them into groups. Sarah ended up with her father and 3 other men she didn't know well. They took the northwest section, the area closest to the Jenkins property. The forest was different now, colder, darker, more threatening. The men moved through it with rifles ready, calling the boy's name. Sarah walked slightly behind them, scanning the ground for tracks, for any sign of where a small boy might have gone. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher but gave no warmth. Sarah's fingers were numb inside her gloves. They found nothing. No tracks, no torn clothing, no sign the boy had been this way at all. The men were getting frustrated. We're wasting time, one of them muttered. Boy could be anywhere. Could be dead already if those wolves found him. Sarah's father shot the man a look but said nothing. That's when Sarah saw it. A small footprint in the snow, near the base of a fallen log. She knelt down. The print was fresh, maybe an hour old. And next to it, barely visible, the print of a wolf's paw. Sarah's heart raced. She looked in the direction the prints led, deeper into the forest, toward a rocky area she knew well. There was a cave there, small and sheltered, a place where someone, or something, could hide from the cold. Pa, she called softly. Her father came over, looked at what she'd found. His face went pale. Get the others, he said. But Sarah was already moving, following the tracks. She heard her father call after her, but she didn't stop. She ran through the trees, her boots slipping on the snow, branches catching at her clothes. The tracks were clearer now, easier to follow. The boy's prints. And beside them, wolf tracks. Multiple wolves. The cave opened up ahead. Sarah slowed, approaching carefully. She could hear something inside, a small voice, talking softly. She moved to the entrance and peered in. What she saw made her breath catch. The boy sat at the back of the cave, alive, unharmed, and surrounding him, keeping him warm with their bodies, were the wolves. The gray wolf lay closest to the boy, its body pressed against him. The pups were there too, bigger now, nuzzling against the boy's hands. The boy looked up and saw Sarah. Lady, he said, his voice small and scared. I got lost. I was so cold. But the big dogs found me. They kept me warm. Sarah's throat tightened. The wolves had saved him. In the harshest winter in years, when they were struggling to feed themselves and their own pups, they had found this lost child and kept him alive through the freezing night. The gray wolf's eyes met Sarah's. In that moment, she understood. This was why they had approached the ranch. This was why they had sought her out, shown themselves to her. They had been looking for help, yes, but they had also been offering something. An alliance, a partnership, a reminder of something old and forgotten. Humans and wolves had survived together once, long ago. Maybe they could again. Sarah heard the men crashing through the forest behind her, her father's voice calling her name. She had seconds to decide. She stepped into the cave slowly, hands out, non-threatening. It's okay, she said softly to the boy. You're safe now. These wolves aren't going to hurt you. The boy looked at the wolves, then back at Sarah. I know, he said. They're my friends. Sarah helped the boy to his feet. The gray wolf stood and moved aside, watching. Sarah led the boy toward the cave entrance just as her father and the other men arrived, rifles raised. "Don't shoot!" Sarah shouted, putting herself between the men and the wolves. Her father's eyes went wide when he saw his daughter standing there, the boy safe beside her, the wolves at her back. "He's okay," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "The wolves found him. They kept him warm through the night. They saved his life." The men lowered their rifles slowly, staring in disbelief. The boy ran to his father, who had just arrived, out of breath. "Papa! Papa, the big dog saved me. They kept me warm." His father grabbed him, holding him tight, tears streaming down his face. Sheriff Morrison looked from the boy to the wolves to Sarah. I don't understand." Sarah's father stepped forward, his face unreadable. He looked at the wolves for a long moment. The gray wolf held his gaze, calm and steady. Then her father lowered his rifle completely. "I think," he said slowly, "I've been wrong about some things." He looked at Sarah. "I think maybe your mother was right. Maybe mercy isn't weakness." The crowd that had gathered at the cave entrance parted. Mrs. Jenkins pushed through, fell to her knees, and pulled her son into her arms. She looked up at Sarah, then at the wolves. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." She wasn't talking to Sarah. She was talking to the wolves. The gray wolf dipped its head just slightly, then turned and led the pack deeper into the cave, disappearing into the shadows. The men lowered their weapons. One by one, they turned and began the walk back to town. Sarah's father put his hand on her shoulder. "You tried to tell me," he said. "I should have listened." Sarah looked up at him, saw the tears in his eyes. "Ma would have understood," she said. Her father nodded. "She always did. She saw things I couldn't, like you do." He pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry." The walk back to town was quiet but different than before. News of what had happened spread quickly. By the time Sarah and her father reached the town square, people were gathering, talking in hushed voices. The Jenkins boy was safe. The wolves had saved him. Everything they thought they knew about the pack, about nature, about survival, it was all being questioned, reconsidered, seen in a new light. That night, Sarah stood on the porch of the house and looked toward the forest. The moon was rising, full and bright. In the distance, she heard them, the wolves, howling. Not a sound of threat, a sound of family, of pack, of survival. Her father came out and stood beside her. "They'll make it," he said. "The winter's halfway done. They're strong. They'll survive." Sarah nodded. She thought about the gray wolf, about the intelligence in its eyes, about the choice it had made to save a lost child when it could barely feed its own pups. She thought about the young wolf who had died to protect the pack, about sacrifice and courage and the thin line between life and death in this harsh land. She thought about her mother and the lessons she'd tried to teach, lessons about balance, about respect, about seeing beyond fear. "Pa," Sarah said, "tomorrow can we take some meat out to the cave, just to help them through?" Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Your mother used to do that, in the hard winters. She'd leave food at the edge of the forest. Said it was payment for them keeping the other predators away. I thought she was being foolish." He smiled, sad and small. "Maybe I was the fool." The next morning, Sarah and her father rode out together. They left 2 deer carcasses near the cave entrance, far enough back that the wolves wouldn't feel threatened. They didn't see the pack, but Sarah knew they were watching. She could feel their eyes from the shadows. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her father tipped his hat toward the darkness, a sign of respect. Then they rode home. Winter gradually loosened its grip. The snow began to melt. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, but it came. Sarah watched for the wolves but didn't see them. She hoped that meant they had moved deeper into the mountains, to safer territory. One morning in early April, she was walking near the edge of the property when she saw something that made her stop. In the soft mud near the creek, fresh tracks, wolf tracks, and beside them smaller prints. The pups had survived. They were healthy enough to travel. Sarah knelt and placed her hand next to the print. It was almost as large as hers. The pups were growing. They would survive. The pack would continue. She stood and looked toward the mountains where the peaks were still white with snow. Somewhere up there, the gray wolf was teaching its pups how to hunt, how to survive, how to be strong, just like Sarah's father had taught her, just like Sarah's mother had taught her. Different lessons, same love. She walked back to the house. Her father was repairing a fence post, his movement steady and sure. He looked up when she approached. "Saw the tracks," he said. Sarah nodded. They made it. Her father smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen in months. "Good," he said. "That's good." He went back to his work and Sarah went to hers. The ranch needed tending. Life needed living. But something had changed. Something important. That evening, as the sun set over Pine Valley, Sarah stood on the porch one last time. In the distance, barely visible against the darkening sky, she saw a shape on the ridge, the gray wolf, watching over the valley. Watching over them. Sarah raised her hand in acknowledgement. The wolf stood for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared over the ridge. Sarah smiled. She understood now what her mother had tried to teach her, what the wolves had shown her. Strength wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing mercy when you had the power to destroy. It was about seeing beyond fear to the truth underneath. It was about understanding that sometimes the things we're taught to fear are just trying to survive. Like us. Sometimes the line between wild and tame, between enemy and friend, between human and animal, wasn't as clear as people wanted to believe. Sometimes all it took was one person willing to look closer, to see differently, to choose differently. Has anything like this ever happened to you? A moment when you had to choose between what you were taught and what you knew in your heart was right? Tell me in the comments. I love reading your stories. And if this story touched you the way it touched me telling it, subscribe so I can keep sharing more stories like this. Stories about courage, about compassion, about the connections we share with all living things. Until next time, my friends.